Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some days you can totally manage your emotions, and other days it feels like a complete roller coaster? Well, this new study dives deep into how adults with ADHD tendencies deal with those big feelings and what it means for their mental health. So imagine a day where you are feeling overwhelmed, maybe a little frustrated. How do you handle it? Do you try to think about the situation differently, or do you push those feelings down? This study looks at two main ways people try to manage their emotions: reappraisal and suppression, and how they're connected to ADHD tendencies and overall mental well-being. It is not just about whether you have ADHD, but how those tendencies might influence the way you cope with your emotions, and in turn, how you feel mentally. The researchers were really curious about whether the way people regulate their emotions, specifically using reappraisal or suppression, helps explain why adults with ADHD tendencies might experience more mental health struggles. They also wondered if the importance of these strategies changes depending on how strong someone's ADHD tendencies are. So, they weren't just looking at a simple yes or no answer, but a deeper connection. To figure this out, they did a big online survey. They asked nearly 300 adults a bunch of questions to understand their ADHD tendencies. They used a well-known questionnaire for this, the Adult ADHD Self-Report Scale, or ASRs. They also asked about how people try to manage their feelings using something called the Emotion Regulation Questionnaire, or ARQ. This questionnaire specifically asks about using reappraisal and suppression. And finally, they measured mental health using the K6 scale, which is good at picking up symptoms of anxiety and depression. Now, here's the clever part. They didn't just look at everyone as one big group. They divided people into two main categories based on their ASR scores. One group had scores above a certain cutoff, suggesting more significant ADHD tendencies, and the other group was below this cutoff. This allowed them to compare how emotion regulation might work differently for people with stronger or milder ADHD tendencies. Let's get to what they found. First, they tested if reappraisal or suppression actually changed or moderated the link between ADHD tendencies and mental health. Think of moderation like a dimmer switch. If reappraisal or suppression were moderators, they would make the connection between ADHD and mental health stronger or weaker. But in this study, they found that these strategies didn't act like dimmer switches. That is, they didn't significantly change the overall strength of the arrow pointing from ADHD tendencies to mental health. Okay, so if they're not dimmer switches, what are they? The study found that reappraisal and suppression actually play a role within that connection. This is called mediation. Imagine the path from ADHD tendencies to mental health as a road. Reappraisal and suppression are like rest stops or scenic routes along that road. The study found that using reappraisal, which means thinking about a situation in a different way to change its emotional impact, was a significant part of this road. When people with higher ADHD tendencies used less reappraisal, their mental health tended to be worse. This suggests that reappraisal is particularly important in helping to buffer the negative impact of ADHD tendencies on mental health. This is where the comparison between the two groups gets really interesting. They used a sophisticated statistical method called structural equation modeling to really unpack these relationships. For reappraisal, the story was pretty consistent. Whether someone had stronger or milder ADHD tendencies, the link between using reappraisal and their mental health seemed to work in a similar way. Higher ADHD tendencies were linked to less reappraisal, and less reappraisal was linked to poorer mental health. This pathway was pretty stable, but suppression, which is about trying to hide your emotions, told a different story. While the link between ADHD tendencies and using suppression didn't really differ much between the groups. How suppression affected mental health did differ. In the group with lower ADHD tendencies, using suppression was linked to poorer mental health. This is a bit surprising because you might expect suppression to be always bad. However, in the group with higher ADHD tendencies, the study found that suppression didn't have a significant link with mental health. This hints that for people with more significant ADHD tendencies, suppression might not be as harmful, or perhaps it serves a different purpose that this study couldn't fully capture. So to wrap up the core findings, no reappraisal and suppression weren't acting like moderators, changing the overall strength of the ADHD mental health connection. But yes, they were definitely part of the picture. Acting as mediators, reappraisal was consistently helpful, linking lower use to poorer mental health across the board. Suppression, on the other hand, showed a more complex relationship, being linked to worse mental health, mainly in the group with fewer ADHD tendencies. This is a really important takeaway. How effective or detrimental suppression is might depend on the individual's level of ADHD tendencies. For some, trying to hide emotions might backfire and lead to worse mental health. But for others, it might not have the same negative impact. It is not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The researchers suggest that when we think about why people with ADHD struggle with their emotions, we need to look beyond just how often they use certain strategies like reappraisal or suppression. We also need to consider the context of those emotions. What kind of feelings are they trying to manage? Are they intense? Are they fleeting? Understanding this bigger picture might be key to helping people with ADHD better regulate their emotions and improve their mental health. The study looked at adults with ADHD tendencies and how they use reappraisal, which is like changing your thoughts to change your feelings, and suppression, which is like holding back your expression of feelings. They wanted to see how these strategies affected mental health. So they checked if the way people reappraise or suppress emotions actually changed how strongly ADHD tendencies were linked to mental health. It turns out it didn't. They weren't like a dial that turned the connection up or down. This part made sense with what we already know. People who scored higher on the ADHD tendencies questionnaire tended to use reappraisal less often. This means they might not be as likely to try and reframe challenging situations to feel better. This was unexpected. Usually, you might think people with ADHD might suppress emotions more due to impulsivity or difficulty with emotional expression. But this study found the opposite. Higher ADHD tendencies were linked to less suppression. This is a really interesting piece of the puzzle. It might mean that people with stronger ADHD tendencies are not necessarily trying to hide their emotions more, but perhaps their emotions are so intense, or they struggle to regulate them in ways that lead to overt suppression. This is the core of the findings regarding the group differences. The pathway through reappraisal was pretty much the same for both groups. If you tend to use less reappraisal, your mental health is likely to be poorer, regardless of whether you have stronger or weaker ADHD tendencies. This is the surprising part about suppression. When people had lower ADHD tendencies, using suppression was linked to worse mental health outcomes like higher anxiety and depression. This is counterintuitive because sometimes people suppress emotions to try and feel better or appear fine. But here, it seems to have backfired for those with less pronounced ADHD tendencies. For the group with higher ADHD tendencies, the link between suppression and mental health was much weaker, almost non-existent in this analysis. From a practical standpoint, this means that working on strategies to increase reappraisal could be beneficial for everyone, no matter their ADHD tendencies. Teaching people how to reframe situations, find different perspectives, or focus on the positive aspects could really help their mental well-being. However, they're saying we can't just label suppression as bad. Its impact seems to depend on the person and the situation. For those with higher ADHD tendencies, it might not be the direct culprit for poor mental health that it is for others. This opens up a door to explore why suppression might be less harmful, or even sometimes helpful for this group. Maybe it's about what they are suppressing or how they are suppressing it, or maybe it is a temporary coping mechanism in certain situations. This part of the results highlights that while reappraisal and suppression play a role, they don't explain the whole story, especially not equally for everyone. In the group with higher ADHD tendencies, the ADHD symptoms themselves had a stronger overall connection to poor mental health than reappraisal and suppression could account for. This points to other important factors that might be at play for individuals with stronger ADHD tendencies. Things like how intensely they feel emotions, how quickly their emotions change, or their general ability to control impulses and regulate their behavior might be much bigger drivers of their mental health struggles than just the specific emotion regulation strategies they use. Now, it is important to talk about what this study can tell us. Since they use a screening tool, the ASRs, and not a formal clinical diagnosis of ADHD, the findings are about ADHD tendencies rather than a diagnosed condition. This means we can't say for sure these results apply to everyone with a formal ADHD diagnosis, though they offer valuable insights. Also, this was a snapshot study. They collected all the data at one time. Because of this, it is hard to say for sure if using less reappraisal causes poorer mental health, or if people with poorer mental health are just less likely to use reappraisal. The direction of cause and effect isn't perfectly clear, which is common in survey-based research. Another limitation is that they focused on just two specific strategies, reappraisal and suppression. Emotion regulation is a lot more complex than just these two. There are many other ways people try to manage their emotions, and the study didn't capture all of that. And an interesting point they raise is that because the study was conducted in Japan, cultural norms around expressing emotions might play a role. In cultures where showing emotions openly is less common, suppression might be viewed differently, and its impact on mental health could change compared to cultures where emotional expression is more encouraged. So, to bring it all together, this study gives us a clearer picture of how reappraisal and suppression fit into the complex relationship between ADHD tendencies and mental health. They're not altering the main connection, but they are part of the pathway. Reappraisal seems to be a consistently helpful tool for mental well-being. While suppression's role is more nuanced and might depend on how strong your ADHD tendencies are, it really emphasizes that understanding emotion regulation for individuals with ADHD needs to go beyond just simple strategy use and consider the broader emotional context. My take on this research is that it's a really valuable step in understanding the complex emotional world of adults with ADHD tendencies. The finding that reappraisal is consistently beneficial is great clinically, giving us a clear target for intervention. The nuanced role of suppression is particularly fascinating and opens up a lot of questions. It suggests we need to be careful not to universally pathologize suppression and instead investigate its specific functions in different contexts and for different individuals. The study's limitations, like the cross-sectional design and the focus on only 2 strategies, are important to keep in mind. Future research could build on this by using longitudinal designs to better understand cause and effect, and by incorporating measures of other emotion regulation strategies, as well as looking at the specific types of emotions being regulated. Exploring the cultural factors mentioned is also a rich area for future inquiry. Ultimately, this research is a significant contribution to helping us better support the mental health of individuals navigating the challenges of ADHD tendencies. What do you think about these findings? Do you find yourself using reappraisal or suppression more often? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with anyone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more insights into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.